Here beginneth, in the beginning, a collection of bedtime Bible stories written, produced by Homer Francis Rogers and recorded by his son. In the beginning, Genesis 1 through 26. Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, so long ago nobody can even remember it, so we have to depend on God to tell us what happened. Anyway, it was ever so long ago, before the fairies were born and before dreams began. So long ago there wasn't anything in the whole wide world. In fact, there wasn't even any world, no stars in the sky or even any sky. There wasn't anything, not even empty space, just an enormous amount of nothing except God. God was there and nobody made him. God has always been, because there has to be something before there can be anything else. You can understand that. If ever there was really nothing, absolutely nothing, there'd still be nothing, because a nothing can't possibly make a something. So when we say there was nothing, we mean there was nothing except God. But God wasn't lonely, no sir. Because God is a Father, a Son, and a Holy Ghost, the Blessed Trinity. And they were so happy together that they didn't need anything else. You see, God is like an angel, only much, much more so. He is a pure spirit. He doesn't have a body or hands and eyes and feet and a nose. So he didn't need toys or food or clothing or tools or pictures on a wall. All the reality there is or possibly ever might be, God already had inside himself. And the three persons of the Blessed Trinity were enjoying all this and each other, and they were so happy they didn't need anything else. Then one day God said, "You know, this is too pretty to keep all to ourselves. There ought to be others who could enjoy it also." But there weren't any others with whom to share it. But a little thing like that isn't going to bother God for very long. He said, "We'll just make some others." First, he made the angels, countless millions and millions of them. Now these millions of angels didn't fill up much room, because angels don't have bodies. 2 angels don't take up any more room than 1, and 200 don't take up any more room than 2, because angels are like thoughts. How much room does a thought take up? Not much. God made these angels so that there might be others with whom he could share all his fun. It's like God said, "Let's have a party." And there wasn't anybody to invite to the party. So God made a whole bunch of guests. That's the angels. Now I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but some of God's guests were very, very naughty. Maybe sometimes you have a party, and some of your guests don't behave themselves properly. Some of God's guests were like that, but even worse. Some got very ugly and started a fight. And when they couldn't have their own way, they left the party. You might ask why God allowed these rude guests to spoil the party. Well, God is very polite, and is not going to clobber his guests just because they don't like the party. So he said to the rude guests, "I'm sorry you don't like my party, but you shouldn't spoil it for everybody else. If you play by the rules, you can stay, but if you don't like it here, you have to leave and go home." So the bad angels left the party in an angry rage. But they weren't very bright, because they didn't have any home to go to. God had made them out of nothing, and there wasn't much of anywhere for them to live apart from the party. Ever since then, there have been some angels who have been wandering around on the fringes of existence, hovering over the brink of nothingness, pouting and sulking and being spiteful, and hating everything and everybody because God wouldn't let them spoil his party. However, in spite of this unpleasant episode, God and the good angels went on enjoying the party, loving everybody and everything, and having a wonderful time. They were kind of sorry for the bad angels who had left, but there was still plenty of ice cream, cake, and fun to be had, so God decided to make some more guests. And he thought it would be nice to let his other guests help. So he said to the good angels, "Let's make some people," or as the Bible puts it, "Let us create man in our own image." And God continued, "Let's make a world to put them in. They'll be a different kind of guest. We'll give them hands and feet and a body to live in, with eyes and ears and noses. Now, these new guests were going to have eyes and ears and noses. There ought to be something for them to see and hear and smell, and that's why God made the world. All of God's angel guests thought that would be just loads of fun, and they all wanted to help. So God gave each of them something to do. Of course, the angels weren't very good at creating themselves, so God had to tell each of them exactly how to go about it. In fact, God could have done it just as well without them, perhaps even better, but the good angels were very obedient and cooperative, which is why they were good angels. And all in all, it turned out to be a pretty good world, don't you think? One of the angels said, "What'll we make first?" Well, God replied, "If these people we're going to make are going to see, we'll have to make something for them to see by." So God said, "Let there be light." And they all set to work to make light, and it was so pretty, and it was so much fun making it, that they made more and more of it, just enormous amounts of it. Then one of the angels said, "This light is such fine stuff, I believe we can make everything else out of it." "Of course," said God, "that's the idea." They went on making more and more light, until finally one of the angels said, "You know, God, there's a lot more of this beautiful light than we need to make a world. What will we do with all that's left over?" "Don't worry about it," God answered. "What's left over we can put in the sky to make stars and a Milky Way, and maybe a great big ball of it to be the sun." And that's just what they did. Finally, God said, "Okay, that's enough light. Now let's begin to make some other things." So they took some of the light and cooled it off and slowed it down a bit and used it to make water and earth. And they had a lot of fun deciding where the water was to go and where the shorelines would be, and piling up huge chunks of rock and earth to make mountains, and scattering water all over everything to make rain, and watching it run down the sides of the hills in streams and rivers, like giving the earth a bath, or maybe more like when you water the lawn. When you water the lawn, things begin to grow, which is what happened. God made the grass and bushes and trees, and you can imagine what fun they had making all the different kinds of growing things and painting them all green. After a while, they got out the reds and yellows and browns and began to color the trees and shrubs in these bright colors. And it was autumn. And then, like when you tear out the pages of a coloring book and start all over the fresh page, they began all over again with green, and it was spring. Then God took some of the leftover light and made a sun and a moon and lots of stars, and he put them up in the sky like putting tinsel on a Christmas tree, and he gave them all a shove, and they began to go round and round. The angels clapped their hands in sheer delight and sang with joy. Next, God made the fish, letting the angels help, of course, and the tadpoles and wiggletails, and the whales and sharks and octopuses and all the millions of different kinds of things that live in the water. He never seemed to run out of ideas for new and different things, and he never grew tired at all. Then God made the birds, millions of them, and told them to fly around in the air and sing and build nests and lay eggs and gather seeds to eat, for God, you see, had thoughtfully already made the grass and the grain. And then God began to make the animals. One of the angels said, "You know, it looks just like a zoo." And God smiled and said, "Yes, doesn't it?" And there were foxes and camels and cows and horses and dogs and cats and elephants and donkeys, and he made lots of different kinds of each of the animals, like race horses and plow horses and saddle horses and hunting dogs and guard dogs and little dogs for people to hold in their laps, as soon as there were people to do so. When all the world was ready, with land and oceans and a sun and moon properly placed in the sky, and the air full of birds, and the land full of animals, and the sea full of fish, and things growing all over the place, God said, "I guess that's enough things for people to see and smell and taste and hear. Now we're ready to make people." And the whole thing took only 6 days from the time they started. And now it was in the afternoon of the 6th day, and God got ready to make people to put in his world. But that's another story.